Spike Ops Info Podcast, a series about the secret undercover political police who infiltrated over 1,000 campaign groups in the UK. These Spike Ops from the Special Demonstration Squad and the National Public Order Intelligence Unit were tasked with targeting anyone considered subversive. They stole the identities of dead children, deceived women into long-term sexual relationships, and in some cases fathered children. Episode 11, Litigating in Person. Welcome to the Spike Ops Info Podcast. I'm Tom Fowler. I'm joined with
Donal O'Driscoll from the Undercover Research Group.
And today we're going to talk a bit about the inquiry. As you all know, I go to every hearing of the inquiry. I try and follow it as best I can. I get involved in live tweeting and reporting in the breaks and doing stuff afterwards on this podcast and elsewhere. But in terms of actually engaging with the inquiry as a core participant, which is what I am, I'm not really doing that. It's just not really my style. Donal, however, is litigating in person, and whereas I kind of leave things to my lawyer, Donal is his own lawyer essentially, without being a lawyer. So I thought it'd be really interesting to have a chat with him about what the inquiry is like for you, dude. What was it like for you?
Insane. Maybe question choices in my life.
So how did you get to the point where you decided you felt the need to represent yourself?
So I did have a solicitor. I was quite involved in supporting a number of the women who were quite affected, and I had a solicitor I'd used in a previous civil case who I found really helpful, person I could relate quite well to, and I felt got the politics. And I also wanted to support the other people who were with that solicitor. Unfortunately, for other reasons, that solicitor left that firm, and I felt I'd lost quite an important relationship there. And I was quite engaged with the inquiry. A large chunk of my own personal activism has been in the courts, which is quite bizarre as an anarchist to find myself doing that. But in the past, I've done quite a lot of civil cases where I've self-represented. So I'm not a stranger to the law. I'm not a lawyer. I nearly became a lawyer until I realised how much nonsense it was, and how much it wasn't actually about the law, but the mood of the judge on the day. I can't do that nonsense. But I've always had that sort of interest, and I've always been around those scenes doing legal stuff. So when the inquiry came along, it was just a natural extension of my interest in law. So I was. This is the Inquiries Act, this is the process that sets it out, this is a Rule 10 question, this is a Rule 9 question, blah, blah, all the technical stuff. I was quite following it. And I naturally started reading the emails that the lawyer sent out, which I know the majority of people don't do, because they're like, how does this relate to my life, and do I have got 4 or 5 hours to understand it in a day? Shout out to all the core participants who don't read their emails. But I was reading the emails, and I was engaging, and I was saying, well, actually, we need to address these points. So the parallel part of this is, as someone involved in the Undercover Research Group, of reaching out to people, supporting people, encouraging them to come forward and be core participants. I did feel I had that responsibility, but I was also very aware that there's a lot of people out there who are not core participants, but were quite heavily affected by the inquiry and don't have a voice. Now, we keep using this word core participant, so I should explain what that is before we get into the rest of it. Core participant is defined within the Inquiries Act. It's a specific category of person who is considered to have a particular interest in the outcome of the inquiry. Quite often, it's somebody who is a direct victim or affected in some way, or is likely to be criticised by the inquiry. So this is why you'll have the police as core participants, or say in Grenfell, you've got all the Iconic and all the firms that provided the cladding as core participants, because they're all likely to be criticised or potentially criticised. And being a core participant gives you slightly more say in the shaping of the inquiry, or at least the ability to put submissions in. We would prefer this system, not that system. We want to challenge you on this aspect of one of your protocols. It's a lot of quite dull technical stuff. For those of us who are engaged, this is important stuff, but recognising that a lot of people who are not engaged, not interested, for whom it's not what this is about. And there's a lot of people who are not core participants at all, don't get any say. And in the back of my mind, I need to bear in mind their needs. I speak to a lot of them through my work in the Undercover Research Group, and be feeding those sentiments in so they're not forgotten about. So this is all in the back of my mind. So when my solicitor left the firm and was taken over by position was taken over by somebody else who I didn't feel got me in the same way, and I was finding myself spending a lot more arguing points. I'd be on the phone for an hour going, "You can't say this. You these words are wrong. They don't represent everybody, or they're coming from a." I can see why as lawyers you're saying them, but as co-participants, this is not right. We can't accept this amount of, layering of, or, this sort of like good protester, bad protester, all that sort of stuff.
I quite like my lawyer. Jules Carey, my lawyer. He's a rock star man. But it took him a while to kind of get where we were coming from politically.
Yeah. And I have to say, most of the lawyers are great. Yeah, most of them, have had enough experience representing political people of all left-wing stripes. They instinctively get that. I'm just using that as an example that most people get, although a lot of stuff we were talking was a bit more technical.
Yeah.
And I was just, why am I spending all my time talking to a lawyer who's then going to bring that to a meeting when I should be just talking to the meeting itself? Right. And having spent 10 years in the high courts in the shack injunctions, solid. So I told my lawyer that I would be representing myself. Helen Steele was already representing herself, so I was able to go to the inquiry and say, look, I want to do this. Yeah. And they, to my surprise almost, they accepted it.
I mean, did they have any choice really though?
It's a bit weird. They could potentially have refused it.
Right.
Or they could have, they could potentially have just said, well, you can't be a co-participant then. We want this to, not saying they would have, but it was uncertain territory. Not many people have really done this. So it's certainly not in inquiries. So it's like, we're still finding our feet. They were finding their feet. I didn't quite know the outcome, but to me, it was worth the risk. Myself and Helen Steele are the two individuals who are totally representing self-litigants in person. I believe Dave Morris also has some sort of stature as litigant in person, but both Dave and Helen are also part of London Greenpeace, so I've got representation that way, whereas I have no legal representation whatsoever.
You don't just follow the inquiry as a litigant in person either. You're following it as an activist. You're following it as part of the comms group. You're writing up those reports for Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance, daily reports each day. It's an incredibly large amount of work you've taken on by the way in which you're engaging with the inquiry. What does that actually look like in terms of the litigating part of it? Because I know how you behave when the inquiry's on, and you're doing so many different things. Where does the litigating part come into it?
So a large chunk of the work's not actually at the inquiry itself. There is something called Rule 10 questions, which we'll probably come on to at a separate point. But it's reading the emails, being part of the discussion. So I'm part of there's a legal email list for all the lawyers involved where a lot of the stuff gets discussed out, the issues get and the documents that go in on behalf of all the non-stakeholder participants are created. So I have a voice there. I can feed in directly on points or say if I disagree or if I think something needs checking. With that, I was saying earlier, the hat in mind of there's all these people who don't have lawyers. Because the lawyers are great and they fight quite fiercely for their clients, but their focus is, for the most part, on the needs of their clients. And that's important. That's the way it is. Yeah. But that doesn't mean the voices of all those who don't have lawyers, because the inquiry's funding won't cover them or not interested in them, shouldn't be heard. So I see my role is to think on behalf of them. Okay. And just say, well, I speak to the wider group. I can't represent them all perfectly, but I've got a good idea of what direction they would want things to see things going in, or where I know there would be a clear division. So it's about feeding in and understanding, but also understanding the underlying technical reasons for the argument. So you will see documents, we'll see questions, and people go, why is that in there? And I'll go, actually, there's a real tactical reason for that. There's a purpose for that. I can be another voice explaining that, and people will understand, that I'm coming from an activist thing. I'm not just going along with the lawyers. It's because there's a reason for that. So to be that sort of second trusted voice to explain or to if necessarily give an answer as to why we're going down a particular route.
it's a really key point, isn't it? Because like, though there's, however many, I can't remember the numbers of core participants or non-state, non-police core participants. I really hate that phrase because it's like only the state could come up with phrases like that. Non-state, non-police to the public. Members of the public who are core participants, right? Public core participants.
Civilian as inquiry.
Yeah, civilian, which I don't like because I consider myself a combatant in this fucking game. But anyway, there's this. There is this much wider group of people that we know, people like for me, like South Wales Anarchists and Cardiff Anarchist Network are core participants. So there's a wider group who are part of those who are feeding the inquiry that way. It's like a bit removed. We have one representative that actually deals with the lawyers. But for the most part, there's this huge reservoir of people who were involved in activism at times when there was undercover deployments, who were affected by it, who have no direct input to the inquiry at all. And if it wasn't for people like yourself and like all the other various campaign groups that like bring people together, we wouldn't have any mechanism for like kind of hearing their concerns in any like kind of official way, right?
Yeah. But on the other hand, there's a vast amount of paperwork that comes out. There's it's like keeping people informed. A lot of people say it's just too much. It's like they've got their daily lives going. It's also been traumatic for a lot of people, so they don't want to have that engaged daily based engagements. Some people do, a lot of people don't. But every now and again, just having somebody going, wait a second, this is an issue that we need a collective voice in, or this is an issue where we need to do a more public statement, or buried in this protocol is something like, say, on photographs, which I know is a particular issue for a lot of people, but it's like that's a key focus for me. So pulling that stuff out and then going to the wider core participants, I think this needs to be flagged up. We may need to be more proactive, or we may need to think strategically around this issue, so that we're moving past just the sheer anger and the overwhelmingness of it to actually this is places where we can affect, and there's a purpose to actually engaging at this point.
Should people get in contact with you in that way? Do you want to hear from people about these things who are not core participants? Is that something you actually actively want to do?
Yeah. No, there's always a weird balance because I spend a lot of time doing the legal stuff, and even like I'm writing and stuff. If you spend any time in one world, it seeps into your life. There's no way around it. And I will find myself, starting typing up and writing letters in a very legal way and having to check myself. And, it's just like, you're not a lawyer today. You're not doing this in a legal capacity. You're doing this as a human. Not that our lawyers aren't human, but sometimes you have to.
No offense to any of the lawyers who may be listening,
but sometimes you have to straddle several worlds and actually be pulled back out of that world, because what makes good communication is keeping your foot properly in both camps. So I do like hearing from people because it helps me keep that balance. It helps me understand where people are at, and also if there's, because there's so many topics and issues that people's individual points can get lost in trying to address them. That is, the more people who are aware of the small points, actually now is the point we need to be addressing this, or if we don't address it now, we'll lose it.
I'm very aware that the inquiry is an opportunity for the state to learn lessons. That's what it's actually for, right? That's the point of an inquiry. And like us as activists are coming in with a very different set of priorities. I've said already that I'm not particularly interested in the outcomes. It's the disclosure, it's the process of the inquiry rather than the report at the end. Well, it might as well have already been written for the way in which these things behave. So, though I think we're as non-state, non-police core participants, we're engaging honestly and fair-mindedly with the inquiry process. Our aims are not what the inquiry's aims are, right? And like kind of keeping sight of that is quite a difficult process, because it's like the inquiry's doing this one thing, we use it as an opportunity to find out other things, and that's sometimes in conflict, right?
Yeah, I think it's quite often in conflict. Yeah, and it's very easy to misunderstand the nature of the phrase public inquiry, and I think this throws up a lot of confusion. There's not necessarily public about public inquiry. The public in public inquiry is the state.
Yeah.
Really, it's getting your head out of that mindset, and these are all legal. This is working in a legal world. That's not our world, and it's you have to be able to put yourself into that space to truly understand it as well.
We engage with the inquiry for very different reasons, rather than the reasons which are like the official kind of the stated aims. The terms of reference to the inquiry are incredibly narrow, and the thing we always want to do. I mean, the thing I always think is like breaking out of those terms of reference is like where the interesting stuff starts. We've already seen with like the role of the security services is much bigger than we ever thought it was going to be, and that there's these things that are outside the remit. That like there's these glimpses there which like we want to find out more about and we want to expose more of, but the inquiry is like doing the opposite of that, right?
The inquiry's ruled by its own internal logic, and we're constantly in conflict with that logic because it's not our logic, and it has very different aims and objectives, and we can't avoid that, and so we're constantly chipping away at that. We did call for public inquiry, but we didn't get consulted on setting the terms of reference. I
remember the time when we were campaigning for a public inquiry. That was partially because it was like, well, what else do we do?
I guess the way I approach the public inquiry isn't so much in terms of the public inquiry itself, it's in terms of the resistance we're getting.
Right.
It's clearly this is distressing for the state.
Isn't it marvellous that it is? Yes.
It's a unique opportunity. It's not the opportunity we would have in a perfect world.
Oh, God, no.
But there's not going to be anything like this in our lifetime, or probably several lifetimes afterwards, where the state will allow this much of a spotlight into one of the darkest shadows it's the secret state.
Yeah.
It's quite literally, these are the Secret Service. It's all about secrecy. And for once they're showing a spotlight on it. For once there's going to be moral judgment coming out of it. For once we're going to be able to actually see what was paranoia and what wasn't paranoia. The vast majority of people I engage with on this, it's about getting answers. What the inquiry concludes is less important than the fact that they get answers, they get understanding, because that helps them with the trauma. I'm involved in the inquiry first and foremost to support the people who've been traumatized, and I want to do that. But at the same time, there's the wider attack on democracy and the right to protest, and this, because it's not just about the spy cops, it's about the attitudes that motivated the spy cops and their bosses against the entirety of the left wing, and understanding how, where, and what they moved, what sort of milieu they moved in, what sort of ideology was influencing them, so that we can understand better, so we can build up a better picture of how they operated. And so there's some various conspiracy theories we can just go out the window. That was all just baloney. But other ones we're going, actually, that's probably a bit closer to the truth than we ever realised. And with understanding, I hope, comes empowerment. And for me, ultimately, what I would like to see coming out of this is people empowered to be able to look at the state objectively and go, this is what we're likely to face.
Yeah.
And this is how we come together. Because, like with many victories in the past have always been preceded by losses, and the losses have taught us how to achieve victory and what we need to do. And I see that we're not going to win the inquiry. I say win in inverted commas, in any meaningful sense, but it will teach us a set of really important lessons, and we need to be in place to learn those lessons.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of people don't really realise what an aberration this kind of public inquiry on this kind of topic is. And as you say, it's a unique moment, really, of like us being able to look at this entire topic. And it is about the wider sort. It's a glimpse into the minds of the repression of protest, the repression of activism, the repression of political expression from the grassroots, from below. And like what we're getting a picture of from following the inquiry is essentially the police being at war with social progress. Right? They're not just infiltrating groups. They're not just infiltrating the lives of individuals, but they are attempting to stifle changes in public opinion. And that literally it's about the ideas. It's about the changes to everyday life. The way in which they targeted the women's liberation movement, the way they targeted the anti-apartheid movement. You can see it almost like even with Vietnam, where it's a very direct thing about this protest movement that's got out of control. There's a huge element there of fighting the social progress that's within that movement. That all these ideas that are coming up that they just want to stifle. Or like you say, this isn't just about the undercover police. This is a wider thing. But we're getting glimpses of what the mindset was of those senior police who were engineering this.
Yeah, I think where you see this particularly in the documents is the stuff around the meetings of the Socialist Workers' Party and WRP and loads of all those other groups. One document I was reading 2 nights ago was the babysitting rota for Tottenham IS. It was a list of names and addresses. And this was all been gathered on in terms of counter subversion. And it's like, and the inquiry has been asking quite a bit of questions about this, and you can see that they're also going, what was the justification of this? Well, the justification is subversion. Okay, well, let's unpick what subversion is. And they're not able to. Even the inquiry is going, it's like, this is a bit weird. And so you've got the statement from MI5 saying it's like this sort of amorphous threat to the state. And you're realizing that it's a threat to ideology. It's a threat to everything. It's anything that kind of outstays. And an intelligence operation that becomes a thing in itself. There's, these labels of, counter-subversion morph and adjust over time simply to justify the ongoing things. They saw the entirety of the left as a threat. There's a quote, not in the inquiry but somewhere else, where they spoke of, I think it was the head of MI5 being so paranoid that if he saw somebody reading the Daily Mirror, he would ask for them to be investigated to find out where they lived, simply for reading the Daily Mirror. They had that sort of anything that is not on the right wing.
The rich are getting away with it so much. The British establishment is getting away with it so much. No wonder they're so terrified, because actually if people start getting involved in politics and start putting working class people first in any of these issues or any of the other marginalized groups in society, we've got such a moral right on our side that of course they're scared. Of course, shit at any moment. There's that slogan. The rich only sleep at night because we let them. Yeah. And it's literally they're worried that one day we're going to realize what an absolute scam they've got going on, and they're going to upset the scalpel cart. So no wonder they're terrified of somebody reading the Daily Mail, even the Daily Mirror. Even it's oh God, shit. They're gonna rumble us any minute.
Yeah, and there is this. We've talked about paranoia before and stuff, but if you want to talk about real paranoia, the state is possibly the most paranoid and over the most flimsiest and trivial of things, and they will dress up and go, oh yeah, but we weren't spying on MPs, or we weren't interested in parliamentary things. It's so why are you spying on groups that are directly standing for election? Every argument that they've put out over the years, we're seeing direct evidence is nonsense. Yeah. There's this great thing of the Wilson doctrine about not spying on MPs. This inquiry has totally discredited that the Wilson doctrine was anything other than a sop to tell Parliament or a Prime Minister that everything was okay. It never. The reality is, it didn't exist.
No, not at all. Not at all.
And it's so things like that coming out of the inquiry make it worth doing.
We get revelations come out, and you sometimes get this attitude from people of oh, well, we knew that was happening. It's no, we didn't know. We thought we did, but now this process is giving us dates and black and white. Lots of us thought that the Wilson doctrine was unlikely to be actually, but now we know for a fact it wasn't, because they were spying on MPs plenty, and we've got the receipts.
It's why the police love neither confirm nor deny, because it allows for credible doubt to be introduced. So, well, you're saying this, but where's your evidence? Yeah. Well, I can only suspect it. Now we're going, well, actually, we're not just suspecting. We're able to, as you say, give those facts And that's where we step beyond paranoia, and that's where we actually end up with proper risk analysis, proper critique, because we've got something to go, actually this is the case.
So in terms of like going back to actually the nuts and bolts of the inquiry, in terms of those questions, because like for people who are following the inquiry, we know that there's a load of the interviews of former undercover officers done by the counsel of the inquiry. None of our lawyers get the opportunity to put any of those questions, but we do get the opportunity to feed in to what the questions are going to be. Given that you've been part of the conversations of like kind of feeding in from the lawyers group perspective, and then actually witnessing what it's actually like, how much of an impact are the kind of questions that you and the lawyers are putting forward actually ending up as part of the interviews?
So this is the Rule 10 process.
Yeah.
And it's possibly the area where I've been most active
Right.
recently on the legal front. And when I'm at the inquiry, that's generally where I'm most engaged. So a few years ago in this long saga, we created what was the generic list. So a set of 119 questions that we wanted to put to every officer, covering the vast majority of what the issues, but in terms of the terms of reference, but also wider issues. For example, were these undercovers involved in babysitting? Which, it's not on the terms of reference, but you can imagine it's quite a big issue. And we were the ones flagging up, the issue of reporting on children, stuff. So it was an agreed. Well, we made submissions. The police made submissions, and the inquiry made a fait accompli. This is what the generic questions are. So that's the general background material that feeds in. The Rule 10 process is the ability to put questions to the inquiry to ask the officers. Because it's a public inquiry, the theory, and this is very theoretical, is it's inquisitorial rather than adversarial. Adversarial is what we normally expect of courts. It's prosecutors saying, "You're guilty scum," our defense lawyer going, "No, sweet angel, you've got no evidence," and then you have a long discussion about who's right and who's wrong. So it's very about conflict and challenging each other. In inquisitorial, you're supposed to get rid of all of that, except nobody's told the police this. And they continue to approach this in a very aggressive way, a very obstructive way. But in terms of the actual process, the law around this, it means that everything gets channeled through what's called the counsel to the inquiry. It's a barrister, usually in this case David Barr. And it's they who put the questions to each of the witnesses on behalf of both the inquiry, but all the other core participants. Primarily they work on behalf of the inquiry, but we get the feed in. So we submit what's called the Rule 10 questions to the council, and they go through them and say, yeah, we'll ask that one. We were going to ask that one anyway. Oh, that's a good question. We'll ask that. No, we're not going to touch this. We intend to ask another witness of this, or why is this relevant? Go away. And it's been a mixed bag.
Okay.
But we definitely have had our questions asked. I know there's definitely points sitting during the hearings and going, "Oh, that's our question," and people are going, "Why is that relevant?" And they say, "Oh, that's really relevant because what we don't get is just free access to them. We're not allowed to go through a normal process of write name, address, and then work down to the points we want to get to and build up the picture. We sit down, read through all the documents, read through their written statements, and say, well, we almost got the understanding, but if we know about that one little point, it'll increase our understanding. So we ask that narrow point because we can fit it into the jigsaw properly. And the police are doing this, and the counsel to inquiry are doing this. So what you'll get in the process is a narrative built up by the inquiry, the counsel inquiry, to deal with their stuff. And then you'll get a whole set of randomish questions. You're going, why are they asking that? And it's usually because they've picked up on points that we wanted to know and, fed in points. So you won't see the immediate benefit, but later on when we come to address the wider issues, we'll say, well, that undercover said at that point, this thing that we know is of this relevance. So it's not a very transparent process, but that's generally how it works.
To say it's not a very transparent process is a bit of an understatement. It is entirely confusing as someone who's following it as best as I can without really getting involved in the nitty-gritty of putting things together, it was not at all clear to me that there was anything, that the feeding in was actually taking place. It didn't feel like it was, because the way that it's presented. The process of it just makes it really, really alienating.
And this is my advantage of being a litigant in person, is that I get that I'm that one step closer that most people aren't. So I've had more engagement with that process. And I'm also recognizing things when they are coming up because of it. Because most of this is done through the lawyers. Most of it, they listen to their clients and then they do it. And most court participants, aren't going to be interested in all the nitty gritty. A few people with very specific issues will always watch out and go, a number of the women are very, very good at saying, we are going to make sure that we always submit in on a particular set of issues of very vital importance to them. But going back to what I was saying earlier about bearing in mind that there's a wider constituents out there that are not represented, this is one of the key points where I think I'm keeping an eye out on behalf of everybody else. Now, I'm not saying I'm putting myself on the pedestal. I'm the only person who could do this. I would love to be other litigants in person also doing this, but as in a relatively unique position, it's something I feel I can contribute towards and engage. So at the inquiry, I will quite often be with the lawyers, watch out for that, feeding back, thinking about where this fits, or also going, actually, wait a second, this ties into a bunch of issues. We might need to go and speak to other people in order to get an understanding there. The other reason it's not a transparent process is not many people actually get to see the material in advance. And the inquiries deliberately set it up so that everything is restricted. It publishes everything on the day, but that's kind of too late to put questions in.
Yeah.
I have managed to, as a litigant person, get a sight of the bundle in advance, so I'm able to see stuff. And what I have done is when I've gone through the material, I've recognised things and going, actually, this is really important. I need to mention this to this solicitor because they might not recognise the importance of this. Or, for example, when it came out that one of the senior cops had gone on to the Economic League. So I saw the name, saw that, right, so right, I need to make sure that the Blacklist group are aware of this. So, and then it went through the process of formally asking the inquiry, can the Blacklist lawyers be showing this because this may be irrelevant? And because there's so few eyeballs on the documents, it means the lawyers, just can't get through the amount of material. We've got a barrister and a lawyer who sort of represents the generic interest, but it's just a phenomenal amount of material, and they're approaching it for the legal things. And I say, well, I don't need to do it necessarily from the legal point of view. I need to be thinking of what's relevant for the court participants as a wider group, what's relevant to the protest movement as a wider group.
Yeah. We were saying about the eyeballs thing. One of the things that really irritates me is that there's 6 layers of checking by the police, by the inquiry, of disclosure. That things are redacted and checked and double checked.
I think it might even be 8.
It might be 8.
That was the streamlined version.
And then it gets to, it's then disclosed to court participants at the inquiry. There's such a maelstrom of information that comes flying at you when the inquiry's on, with live questions, the live evidence, the written evidence is being published at the same time, that it takes so long to get everything properly looked at and put into context. It's such a huge task, that, and I mean, doing it by yourself, that is incredible. It's an incredibly large amount of work, dude.
Yeah, unfortunately, we are getting through to the inquiry that the circle needs to be widened. I think first time round it was very narrow. Second time round it was widened a bit, and that definitely helped. More eyeballs, and the more people come on, the more that will think. But it was definitely a strain because you're having the right questions, and read everything, and do it within less than 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And this is thousands of pages of documents, mostly badly photocopied.
Oh, they're horrendous. I mean, I got early disclosure this time, the second time round. It is not a user-friendly experience on any stretch. Either the system that the documents are on, like you say, the quality of the documents themselves. Hopefully this will improve as we go further forward, that they're not using 4-part NCR sets with, the carbon papers just dying before it's poorly photocopied.
And they just don't give, they have finally agreed that they're going to start drip feeding us documents, which is something we've been asking in advance. We said, you cannot give everything last minute because we just don't have the capacity, and you're restricting all the funding, lawyers' funding and stuff. So there's big arguments over how many hours the lawyers actually get to look at all of this. But so it's just like, the more time we have to process, and the more effective we can be, and we can actually save you loads of time. One of the points of arguing with the inquiry is that we as core participants are a huge resource. That you are just not valuing. You are more concerned about police redactions and having to go through this 8-stage process before we even get to say whether something is missing the value that we could actually bring to the inquiry. Because yes, you got all these documents, but you don't understand them. You haven't read them. And this is in the last hearings, Diane Langford, I thought was particularly pertinent to this, and she reinterpreted a lot of the documents because she was there at the meetings. She said, actually, what you're seeing here is purely a undercover copper's perspective, and it's totally mischaracterizing what's going on. Now, if that's all you see, you will not understand. So she was able to point out a load of racism and sexism that just a naive reading of the documents wouldn't give you. And I thought, it's like, that's why you need this, because we can point to documents of relevance and interpret them with the because we've all been there. We've been all at these meetings.
Right.
We know what's bullshit and what was actually likely to have rung true. And also when when the undercovers themselves have tainted the picture. It's like the one who's clearly organizing SWP paper sales, and was clearly the one that was barracking other people to do paper sales, but had just twisted the wording so it didn't sound like him. But it's like, as people who say, well, we know exactly what was going on there. You're the organizer. You're the one who would have been doing that. But if you've never sat in that meeting, you're not going to get that.
This is something which is coming up again and again with the inquiry, is that they're relying on the evidence of professional liars.
And this, the whole thing about something that's going through yet again is restriction orders made on the basis of mental health grounds.
Right.
When we know they were specifically tasked and trained to fake mental health issues. We'll go to, they all quote this one set of doctors from a private clinic that deals with all cops. When any of them get into trouble and they need mental health get out, it's always this one firm they go to that sees the signs. It's like, oh, come on.
The inquiry, it buys this bullshit, whether it's buying it because it believes it or it's buying it because it's easier to buy it than not.
I think part of it is it's tied into the system, so it's why the state can never investigate itself, because it has to trust that the system won't lie to itself in order to get an answer. But if the system is actively lying to itself, then it's always going to be working with one hand tied behind its back. And I do get suspicion that there's parts of the inquiry are really frustrated with the police, but they're not powerful enough to actually address it.
At the end of the day, the inquiry is a fairly small, it's incredibly small actually institution that's dealing with an enormous machine. We know that the police have brought, I think it's 2 judicial reviews so far. Like, obviously, anybody who's bringing a judicial review against you, they're being a problem to you.
Yeah, and this is one of the things where it's quite clear that or we will cooperate fully, that they have no interest, about being obstructive. And the ironic thing about those judicial reviews is that we don't actually know what they're about.
No,
we're not allowed to know what they're about. And they've got the resources. There's loads of things that we would like to bring judicial reviews on, but we simply don't have the resources, because we would have to ask the inquiry to fund us to bring a judicial, whereas the police have unlimited things. If they really wanted to level the playing field and give an honest public inquiry, an honest table, or just everybody come to it equally, is to address the funding issues. It's to, either the state gets totally, you are not allowed to keep throwing money at this, or there's some parity. But at the moment, it's with all the funding controlled by the inquiry for the non-state co-participants, we are going to constantly be struggling, and it will never be fair. And the police know this, and the police are prepared to play those games.
And they're really good at it. They're really experienced at it.
And this is why the Daniel Morgan report, which came out recently, was really important. And it was just like, it wasn't just the finding institutional corruption, which was significant in itself. It's also, they name checked the police as being deliberately obstructive Not the police in the past, the police now, the Metropolitan Police now. And another thing that I got was like, you and us, mate. What you're experiencing, we're experiencing. You read the stuff going out in Grenfell. And the other part is like, these battles are not, fought. And that's why I hate the whole liberal perspective on this. They're not fought on any level playing field at all.
And it's the same pig. We're all dealing with the same fucking pig each time. Like, all those ones you just listed. The police are working from the same rule book, the same playbook. They're obstructing as much as possible. They're putting themselves above criticism as much as they can. They will drag their heels and wait for people to die, move abroad, retire, whatever, so that they're no longer on the chopping block.
It's because the outcome otherwise is quite, shows them up. And I think that is one of the reasons for doing the fight is, because society has this myth of the police in the Dixon and Duck Green thing, although it's slowly being eroded, it's still there for a large number of people. And the more people see the reality, the more people will actually stand up and go, wait a second, no. I think this is also an important role of what we're doing in inquiry. It's showing up the reality. It's moving past the Daily Mail, aren't our boys in blue wonderful, to aren't our boys in blue is just a state rape gang.
And that understanding of where Britain is right now in its history, political history, is due in no small part to the role the police have played over the last 50 years. What we're seeing from the inquiry is, and what we get the opportunity to show to people, the role of the police has been incredibly negative for all our lives, right? On an individual level because of how they've acted, but also on the wider things that have been stopped, or the wider things that have taken longer to come to their natural fruition,
Yeah, but also presenting this, community policing by consent, which is a myth.
Complete myth.
But actually being able to challenge that and finding routes in to go, we have got to address this head on, the reality, because a lot of people are holding back. Oh, actually, well, they'll change the law for the better, or they'll reform themselves. The whole point of the inquiry is so the government can learn from its mistakes. Saying that at the same time is putting through a bill that will legalise any abuse.
A part of this inquiry being an aberration means that the information that comes out of it will be treated like an aberration. It's so unusual for something like this to be happening that the recommendations that come out from it, much like with the Daniel Morgan, it was amazing how quickly those criticisms of the current police were deflected in the media. Immediately, Priti Patel and Sadiq Khan both came out saying they had complete faith in the police, that the police now were not the police as they were 34 years ago, that the Met was not institutionally...
They're worse.
They're worse. Yeah, they're fucking worse. The political cover that the cops get from all sides of the political establishment is sickening in an extreme. It really is.
So, and that motivates part of my involvement. It's the ability to stand up and say, right, it's not a perfect battleground. It's not the battleground I've naturally chosen. It's the one I've been thrown into. But it's important we fight it. It's important we don't let them off to, the police are always going to be scum.
Yeah.
But if you don't stand up and shout the scum, then more and more people are going to continue on blind to the abuses that are going around them.
Yeah. Is that thing we were talking about earlier about speaking truth to power? We know what we're doing. We're not speaking truth to power. Power already knows. We're speaking truth in the teeth of power to the public. All right? That's the role, yeah?
You can't always choose your battlegrounds, but you can always choose to fight or not. And you can always choose to fight tactically and strategically. It's been a fascinating experience. It's been exhausting. I don't think any of us anticipated how it was going to turn out. It was July 2014. It was first announced. We are now 7 years on. As somebody from Northern Ireland, in my head there was a Savile inquiry, and that was the outlier. 100 million, almost 20 years, whatever, investigating Bloody Sunday. And I'm thinking I'm now in a process where we're likely to surpass even the Savile inquiry. But also, the police are fighting us so hard for a reason. And that's something that I keep with me. It's just like, if they're fighting us, it's because we are a challenge.
Right,
we and I might not know exactly how I'm challenging in every particular way, but the fact that they feel challenged is important.
If they don't like it, keep doing it. If you want to know more about this topic, check out spycops.info. Follow our social media links you'll find on there. Please like and share this series.